The practice of yoga is believed to have started with the very dawn of civilization. The science of yoga has its origin thousands of years ago, long before the first religions or belief systems were born. The earliest written accounts of yoga appear in the Rig Veda, which began to be codified about 2000 BC. However, it is difficult to establish the date of yoga from this. According to mythical tradition, Lord Shiva is said to be the founder of yoga, and Parvati, his wife, was his first disciple. Lord Shiva himself developed the system of yoga. In different ages and different periods of history, many rishis, sages and saints propounded and expounded it. The first books to refer to yoga were the ancient Tantras and later the Vedas, which were written about the time when the Indus Valley culture was flourishing. Although they don't give specific practices, they reflect yoga symbolically. It is, however, in the Upanishads that yoga begins to take more definable shape. Yoga has been defined and explained by many yogis, saints, scholars and philosophers. But it is Maharishi Patanjali to whom the credit goes for systematizing it. If you heard the story about when deities and demons had churned the ocean, they used the mountain Sumeru as the churning rod in the process. From the churning, nectar came out and Lord Vishnu kept it in a jar. Likewise, the yoga, nectar of Brahma Vidya, was kept by Maharishi Patanjali in a jar, which we know as the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali. Now another point to add here. It is true that credit goes to Patanjali for systematizing yoga, but even then, the question is, who was the first speaker of yoga, remains unanswered? As Patanjali himself mentioned in his first sutra, Atha Yoga Anusasanam, which means now therefore, complete instructions regarding yoga. So, if Patanjali is the first speaker, he could have used only Yoga Anusasanam, which means, here is instruction on yoga. But he used the word Atha. Atha represent the meaning now therefore, which means that these instruction on yoga are in connection with some previous instruction. Regarding the first speaker of yoga, it is a bit of challenging to confirm. However, some scholars are of the opinion that Swami Hiranyagarbha was the first expounder of yoga. History of yoga. Yoga, as we identify it today, is the product of a complex spiritual evolution that has taken place centuries. The exact history of yoga is uncertain. The development of yoga can be traced to over 5,000 years ago. Evidence of yoga postures was found on stone drawings dating from these times. For the purpose of understanding the development of this spiritual tradition, May divided its unfoldment into three time frame. Prehistoric. Teachings transmitted orally from guru to disciple in forest hermitages. Before the written word. In fact, the verses of the Vedas were heard by the rishis, seers in states of deep, yogic meditation or samadhi, and are regarded as revealed scriptures. The historic. Teachings transmitted from guru to disciple in forest hermitages, using both oral and written traditions. Modern. Spiritual teachings gleaned from many sources, indiscriminately, often only through the written word and without the guidance of guru. Now, to know the better understanding of the history of yoga, let's see it into few main categories or period. We can actually divide these into 5 main categories. Number 1, Pre-Vedic Period approx 3000 BC to 2000 BC. Number 2, Vedic Period approx 1500 to 500 BC. Number 3, Classical Period approx 500 BC to 800 AD. Number 4, Post-Classical Period approx 800 AD to 1700 AD. And number 5, Modern Period approx 1700 AD to 1900 AD. Now, let's elaborate this more. Categories or period. Pre-Vedic Period. Approx 3000 to 2000 BC. Archaeologists discovered statues and paintings portraying deities in yoga and meditative poses in the sites at Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa of the Indus Valley period, which strongly suggests that the yoga tradition is fact given special acknowledgement in the Indian society well before the Vedic period. Vedic period. Approx 1500 to 500 BC. It is believed that the development of yoga begins here. The Aryans settle in the heart of the Indus River Valley region, mixing with the local peoples. Both groups share their culture and religion, and the beginnings of the practice of yoga and Hinduism begin. The subcategory of the Vedic period known as Upanishadic period. As previously, study and practice were in form of listing and deep meditation, nothing in written, and passed on to students in same manner. Over time, these lessons were forgotten and students began writing them down as they were heard. From this session came the Vedanta in the form of Upanishads. Epic period. The challenges were always there. Some people still could not hold the infinite with their limited thinking. And so the Ramayana, Mahabharata was written to illustrate these Vedic teachings. These epics are the rich source of information about various kinds of yogic practices. However, the most important section dealing with yoga is known from Mahabharata, which is the famous Bhagavad Gita. The Gita in fact is an ocean of yoga. It is a storehouse of yogas like jnana, karma and bhakti. Here we first learn about the distinct paths of yoga and our responsibilities as student of yogic way. Sutra period. Now using these Vedas as the foundation, Patanjali wrote the Yoga Sutra as the definitive text and practice manual of Raja Yoga. Patanjali was only a compiler of the eightfold Ashtanga system of yoga teaching, which is the model for all of the modern Hatha practices. Classical period. Approx 500 BC to 800 AD. The classical period also considered as the most fertile and prominent period in the history and development of yoga. During this period, commentaries of Vyasa on Yoga Sutra, Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Puranas, Tantra, Natha, Bhakti etc. came into existence. This period can be mainly dedicated to two great religious teachers of India, Mahavir and Buddha. Post-classical period. Approx 800 AD to 1700 AD. This is again a very comprehensive category, which refers to all those many types and schools of yoga that have jumped up in the period after Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, and in contrast to classical yoga. This is the core teaching of Vedanta, and the teachings of great gurus, such as Adi Shankaracharya, Ramanujakarya, Madhvacharya were prominent during this period. In this period some great masters were beginning to probe the hidden potential of the body. Under the influence of alchemy, the new breed of yoga techniques, the possibility of energizing the physical body to such a degree that it could become famous. This was the period when Vedanta, Bhakti Yoga, Natha Yoga or Hatha Yoga flourished. Shat karmas, asanas, pranayamas, mudra and bandhas became essential practice to balancing the nadis and open the chakras before students could enter deeper meditative practices. From this perspective and using this text, many yogis now began teaching asanas as central to the practice, and from this shift come the modern approach to teaching yoga. Modern period. Approx 1700 AD to 1900 AD. The divine tradition of yoga continues even today without any break. In the modern age of yoga, the great yogis like Sri Ramakrishna Param Hansa, Ramana Maharishi, Swami Vivekananda, Swami Shivananda, Maharishi Aurobindo, Adi Sankaracharya have contributed for the development of yoga throughout the world. The West came in contact with yoga, and at the beginning they were more interested in mysticism. Many of the Indian epics and Vedas were translated into English. Bhagavad Gita was one of such translations which brought huge impact on Westerners. In 19th century, yoga was introduced to the Western world through translated work. However, modern yoga arrived in the US during the late 1800s. It can be attributed to many gurus, including Swami Vivekananda, Maharishi Mahesh, Swami Shivananda, VKS Iyengar and so on. Hatha yoga was the most popular yoga form in the West. Slowly and gradually yoga came to assume importance in matters related to health, peace, fitness and spirituality. Some research institutes like Bihar School of Yoga, Swami Vivekananda Yoga School, Kaivalya Dham etc. had made the scientific aspects of yoga very popular. The recent masters of yoga have put more emphasis on the practices of asana and pranayama, sometimes even neglecting the higher spiritual and morally based aims of the ancient science. There are of course many other great yogis, both well-known and more hidden, who represent yoga in one form or another, but I will leave it up to seeker to discover them.